Welcome to Biologica. I'm Dr. Susan, a veterinarian and a marine educator from Maine. On this show, we'll be exploring the many ways that animals and humans interact and that society and nature intersect. Please visit my Patreon or my Podbean page to support the show or to suggest future episodes. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the episode today. Thanks for listening.
If I was a raven, I'd fly on through the heavens. I'd fly to all my loved ones. If I was a raven.
With the leaves starting to turn and the season heading well into fall, today's episode is going to be about ravens. For some reason, I associate the raven with autumn in New England, although they live in all seasons all around the world. The Cornell website allaboutbirds.org says, "These big sooty birds thrive among humans and in the back of beyond, stretching across the sky on easy flowing wing beats and filling the empty spaces with an echoing croak." They talk a little bit about how for centuries people have been fascinated by ravens, and ravens have followed wagons, sleighs, and hunting parties, hoping for food. And so they've thrived and habitated both wild areas, but also more settled and urban and suburban areas. We'll delve in today and look at the ravens, both a little bit of information about some interesting facts about the ravens. I'll go outside looking for ravens and listening to raven calls. And also we'll talk with a biologist who studies ravens and their intelligence and communication. And finally, we'll of course listen to some poetry by Edgar Allan Poe.
I'm sending a raven, blackbird in the sky, sending a signal that I'm here, some sign of life. I'm sending a message of feathers and bone. Just let me know I'm not forgotten out here alone. The air is cold, the night is long. I feel like I might fade into the dawn, fade until I'm gone.
Here come 3 ravens. One's just banking. Landed right overhead with another. One flew off. They really blend into the trees after they land. You can see them as they're flying, but now that they're landed up in the white pine, I can barely see it's there. Here are a couple facts about the common raven. It's an acrobatic flyer, often doing rolls and somersaults. According to Cornell, one bird was seen flying upside down for more than half of a mile. They also, according to Cornell, have learned to distinguish between the sound of a gunshot in the distance and the sound of a car door slamming or another loud sound, identifying which one might be associated with some food they could find. The ravens have featured as important symbols or characters in mythology and religions in both Native American communities and in Europe and others throughout the centuries. In England, the captive ravens of the Tower of London are both beloved and feared because there's a rumor that England will crumble if they ever escape or fly away. The indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest regard the raven as a trickster. They can imitate sounds and words, and in fact, one common raven was at one point taught to mimic the word nevermore from the poem by Edgar Allan Poe that I referenced earlier, and we will hear later. The biologist that we'll talk with today does tell a story about a raven that he knew and a word that it shared with him. Finally, the oldest common raven ever recorded was at least 22 and a half years old. It was found in Nova Scotia and was banded as a way to verify its age. Next, we'll interview Dr. Thomas Bugnar, who's at the University of Vienna in the Department of Behavior and Cognitive Biology. He studies the intelligence of ravens. I'm here today with Dr. Bugnar, Dr. Thomas Bugnar, a professor at the University of Vienna from the Department of Behavioral and Cognitive Biology. Is that correct?
Correct.
Excellent. Thank you for being here today. And we're going to be talking about ravens.
It's a pleasure.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about how you got interested in ravens and studying animal intelligence in general from the beginning?
Yeah. So I start with the second part, interested in cognition or animal intelligence. This has always been there to some extent, I guess. Since I have been a small child, I wanted to understand why animals are behaving in a particular way. So I was then very much attracted to biology first, then to animal behavior within biology. And then within animal behavior, I was puzzled at that time when I was a student that there was very much improvement in understanding the function of behavior and its evolutionary consequences, but there was at that time rather little interest in how things actually work, so on the proximate questions. And cognition in particular was a kind of black box at that time, which I think has historical reasons. So I don't want to blame anybody, but this was basically what I noticed, and so this pushed my interests to go in this direction. And so I got in contact very soon with colleagues from psychology and who are like-minded biologists as well, and started my first research on primates. And then by chance, I actually got hold on the ravens. And this was because I was offered a PhD position there. And I was attracted to this position with the notion that they are primates of the skies after all. So I don't have to change so much my kind of subject. It's just that they have wings now. And at that time I was smiling, but after all, then it turned out that they are really pretty, they had their reputation of being smart, but at that time, nobody really understood what this means. And I'm focusing on social cognition, so I was testing aspects of the social intelligence hypothesis on the birds. And I thought that I am done in a couple of years, and then I can switch back to primates, but it turned out that that's not the case. If you really want to understand what's going on, it takes a little bit longer.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I noticed one of your papers talked about how they have social intelligence. And could you talk a little bit about, if somebody hasn't studied intelligence, what are you focusing on there in terms of just how we might think of anecdotes about raven intelligence and what you're learning about social intelligence and what that means to them?
Yeah, so the tricky part is if you talk about intelligence is that you have to kind of define what you mean. Because intelligence is actually a term that we use to describe our type of cognition, so human cognition. So when we apply this terminology to animals, then we have to watch out because, of course, they are not the same as us. And they are not, in many cases, just a kind of a inferior version of humans. They have evolved their own kind of cognition. So that's, I think, the key point to consider. So then the next question is, what things are similar and what things are different and how do they work? And this is now kind of a big field because again, when it's okay, let's put it this way: how can we then define intelligence or cognition? And for me, the most reasonable definition here is a very broad one, namely information processing. The problem with this is that this is a broad, very broad definition, and you can put a lot of things in it. So you have then to define what aspects of cognition or intelligence you want to look at. And in my case, it's then the social version of cognition, and this basically means that what type of information they process when they interact with others, and what do they have to know? What do they have to? So what they have to learn? What they have to know? How much can they then draw inferences on the basis of what they have learned? How do they apply these kind of skills then under naturalistic conditions? So not only in kind of standardized lab experiments, but under daily life conditions. So these are the kind of questions that I basically address. So on the one hand, we want to understand what problems do the animals face in the natural environment, and on the other hand, what kind of mental representations go together with this kind of problem-solving skills, if you want to. So to give you an idea, I have been now studying ravens, wild ravens, under free-flight condition in the Austrian Alps since about 20 years. And there we had to first understand their social system, because we do know from the literature that adult ravens form pairs, long-term monogamous pairs, and they defend breeding territories to raise their young. And we also know from the literature that the young ravens that are not sexually mature yet, that they do form groups or tend to form groups. And those groups are kind of aggregation at food sources and at roosting sites. But we also knew from the studies on Bernd Heinrich and John Maslow that they do also have a very sophisticated communication system to tell each other about where food sources are located and to recruit them. And so this already suggests that there is more than just an aggregation, but that group formation is an active process. And so what we then had a look at is how they are composed, how do they work, and do the same individuals go around together, or is there coming and going, and then who is in those groups, and how much do they know each other? And it turns out that it's a coming and going in general, but there are, at least here in Europe, quite some individuals develop preferences for particular sites, and they tend to go on those sites quite regularly. And then they meet others that also go there on a regular basis. So they form a kind of a very cohesive unit with very clear dominance rank hierarchies, and also a very nice structure with social bonds and kinship. And then we have the others that are passing by. So I always try to explain this to my students by, if you would be an alien and coming and having a look at the university building from above, then you would see some individuals who come here on a regular basis, almost daily, namely me, for instance, those that are working here. And then you have some others who are coming quite regularly, but not all the time. Most of the students, because they have classes here and there and on another site in Vienna. So you may see them on a regular basis, but not as regularly as the scientific staff. And then you have the visitors or the tourists that just pass by very, very irregularly. And so, and then you have a system of coming and going, but still structure within those systems. And I think that's exactly how the raven groups work. And so now we have been then asking the next question, okay, so, but those that meet on a regular basis, do they know each other? And it turns out it seems that they really know each other very well. So we did this with playback experiments, for instance, where we were playing back the calls of a former friend or non-friend that they for sure haven't seen about 3 years or longer, and they were selectively responding to their friends as compared to their non-friends, former friends and non-friends. So suggesting that they have some kind of idea who the other one is and how their own relation is to them. And we could also show that they also understand not only the relationships they themselves have to other ravens, but they also seem to get their relations between other ravens, so from a third-party perspective. So that I not only know who are my friends or foes, but I also know who are your friends and foes. And they use this to actually intervene, and so to do some politics, because if the first thing was very puzzling is that young ravens already form bonds, like kind of friendships, and those bonds are very, very similar to pair bonds of the adults. So you can measure exactly the same kind of variables, basically.
they'll remember them over time.
Yeah, and then the question is, why do they do this? And then it turned out that they do help each other. So they do provide social support, either directly, physically in fights, or after conflict, so that they actually appease the victim of aggression and give him some massage, some grooming, these kind of things they do. And so they profit from having friends. But the cool thing is that not all of them have friends all the time. And so it might be that some of them are just, the asocial guys, so these kind of non-social outliers, or it could be that for some it's quite difficult to maintain those relationships. And what we have noticed is that as soon as a bond becomes strong, so what we mean with strong is that they start reciprocating the favors. So not only one is grooming the other one, but the other one is grooming back. And as soon as you have this, then they start rising in rank because the others back off. They don't want to fool around with those anymore because they help each other. And and exactly at this stage, when this kind of exchanging favors become reciprocal, then other ravens, namely those that are high up in status and socially very well integrated, they start intervening in these kind of bonds, so bonding attempts. So when those young couples especially start exchanging favors, so one is grooming the other one, then the third individual comes and says, "No, you don't. Stop it." And so this is very, very selective from the big guys with high status towards those that are just about to become a strong couple. And so it really seems that they seem to pay attention, also to monitor what is going on. And as soon as animals start reciprocating, they make them stop doing this. And then the next question is why? And our interpretation is to prevent them from becoming competitors because they will rise in status for sure. So this is actually what we have found out from our studies on the field conditions mainly, to some extent also some additional lab experiments. And then we do, in particular when it's about the cognition underlying these kind of things, we do study them typically in captivity in big aviaries. We can then control the different variables and basically run experiments in the sense that the experiments we usually do when we know, so when we have a very strong hypothesis and think how things work, and then we use an experiment to actually test our hypothesis. And so this is basically, we put them in a situation where they have a choice to this or that, and we would predict what they should choose depending on what kind of information we give them. And then we can see if we are right or wrong.
So you're taking what you've learned from the field and then kind of seeing if it's predictive in that setting. That's really cool. That's kind of amazing, all the complexity there. How do you study in the field? I'm picturing if I see ravens being a non-expert, they look similar to me. And if you're studying social relationships, you must learn to differentiate them. How do you do that? What are the tools or tricks for studying these guys? In the field, especially when I think, how are you kind of figuring out what they're doing?
The key is to catch them and mark them. So we try to catch them. We have, since 20 years, I have now these kind of drop-in traps out at particular sites in the field station, at my field site, where they can go in and then have problems in getting out. And I typically catch the young ones with this. So now it's a good time. So the first fall is always a good time. And then that's usually the young ones go in. And sometimes also older birds go in. They might become trap specialists because they basically get the idea, hey, it's not a big deal to be handled a little bit, and then they let me go and I have a free meal for this. And if adults are going in, they quite often also take others with them. So in this case, we try to, also on a very regular basis, try to catch. Sometimes we are more, sometimes we are less successful. This year was very good so far. And then we do mark them individually with colored rings and also with a colored wing tag. So this is like an artificial feather. And they also get, since 6 or 7 years now, they get GPS tags, very small tags that are solar powered. And so we know where they are.
Oh, wow.
And in this way, we also learned how far they can go in a very short time period. So we have completely underestimated what's going on here. And again, we also very much underestimate the individual variation, because some, they decide they have a preference, or they develop a preference for one site, and then they stay there for the next 10 years, even though they are not breeders, so they don't have a territory for breeding. So they just like this place. And you can see them every day there, but with the GPS, we can show that they hardly go somewhere else. They are there. And then others that do exactly the opposite. They might pass by this particular place maybe once, twice a year, if at all, and they go big distances. So they might jump between Germany and Italy back and forth, crossing Austria all the time, so the mountains. And so, or in between, go from the mountains up half the continent to middle Germany, stay there for 1, 2, 3 weeks, and then come back again. So these kind of things might happen. It's not that everyone is doing this, but there's huge variation. And this is also what we try to understand what's going on here. When they do this, what makes the ravens become very mobile, what makes the raven become very local, and for what do they do these kind of excursion trips? Most likely to check out possible breeding options or mate options. I don't think so, because we have a very good population in the mountains. So there are a lot of ravens around, but breeding opportunities are scarce. So it might be that they actually do these kind of excursion trips to check out possible nest sites.
Interesting. And you said you used to study primates. They're different animals, but are there certain similarities that have struck you versus certain things that are really different in terms of their intelligence or social intelligence?
It depends again what you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the nice thing about studying birds is that we have the theories that we have typically been developed on primates and or human children to explain our evolutionary past. So actually how our kind of brain and cognition have evolved. And so those theories are very powerful, but for me, the interesting part is that we can now use other animals so that are not closely related to primates. It could be other mammals, for instance, cetaceans, dolphins or so, or elephants or carnivores. Take what you want. Or you can use birds. Some birds that have also groups of birds that have also evolved big brains. We can look at those different groups and have a look on, okay, what kind of challenges do they face? What kind of problems do they solve? And we could actually predict already. We could use the theories developed on primates to predict what should be the case. And in my case, it's social complexity, also social intelligence about this. And the argument here is that if you develop a certain degree of social complexity, then this poses challenges in respect to A, B, C, D, and should lead to the solution A, B, C, D. And that's exactly what we can have a look. So we can have a look on what kind of level of complexity do those species develop or evolve, and how do they actually now interact, and what consequences does that have? What are they capable of? And the good thing is now that we can basically use the birds, in my case, to test a hypothesis independently of phylogeny, or almost independently, because the last common ancestor of a mammal and a bird has lived around 300 million years ago. So it was before the dinosaur times. And it's very unlikely that if you find a raven and a chimp, for instance, doing very similar things, that this goes back to a common ancestor. It's very likely that this has evolved independently. And if it has evolved independently and was leading to a very, very similar outcome, then this tells us a little bit about, or actually quite much about, this possible selection pressures. And that's exactly what the theories are about.
What about now with changing pressures, with either climate changing or urbanization, these social dynamics? Is this changing with time as they face new pressures?
They will certainly face new pressures, but I think in the case of ravens, that's not very special for them, because they are species that are very flexible. So they have a very broad diet. They have no big habitat preferences. They are very good in making use of conspecifics, but also heterospecifics, in this case, us humans. So urbanization, for instance, also in the rural areas. So they are pretty good in making use of anthropogenic resources in general, let's put it this way. And not only since a couple of years, but actually, at least if you trust the records from mythology and so, since several thousand years. It goes really way back, because there are a lot of myths about ravens and humans. Yeah, of course, you don't
So they're
believe
pretty
one to one,
adaptable.
but yeah, but there is an indication that the ravens have always been around humans. And this does make sense, because they have a very similar diet, and they have also strong preference for meat, but they cannot hunt, or hardly hunt themselves. And so they need to find other means to get access to these kind of pieces. And here we are perfect providers. So in this respect, when we are introducing changes in the landscape, they can adapt. I'm pretty sure this shouldn't be a problem. The question is just if we let them do this. So that's different. So this is about management questions, and that's a different story.
Interesting. So they're pretty resilient in some ways if we give them space to, or if we let them do that. The last question I had was less big picture, more anecdote or experience. If I'm sure you've seen a lot of things, I'm wondering if any site you've seen a raven behavior or story that comes to mind that surprised you, was unexpected, or sort of, something new you never expected to see when you've been studying them for so long.
Yeah, I mean, I get this question very often, and of course, there are a list of anecdotes that I could give, I have to admit.
Yeah.
It's truly one of their features that they tend to surprise you, even though that you think you know them very well now, they again surprise you. But one of my favorite anecdotes is actually from one of the early years when I had to house a raven for a certain amount of time, half a year or so, singly, because we were looking for a possible mate for him. At that time, we didn't have good connections with other keeping facilities or so. So we were looking for a mate, and he was all by himself, and I was basically visiting him every day, also to give him some company. And then I was gone because I attended the scientific meeting for, about a week or two. I can't remember. It was some time when I was left after I came back. And so he was quite okay and seemed to be happy to see me. So at least he was immediately sitting on my shoulder again. And then I had a small treat for him, what he really liked, in my pocket. And when I grabbed into my pocket and showed it to him, he immediately rushed towards it. And the problem is these are big birds with a big beak. And when they rush really to a small treat that you have in your fingers, it might well be that they not only get the treat, but also a part of your finger. And this usually hurts. So what I did automatically is that I pulled back. And so the bird didn't get it. And then he looked at me, waited, and then he said, "Ouch." and then I replied instantly, "No, ouch, almost ouch." So it was really, to me, it really seems that he was surprised. So his expectancy was violated because I didn't allow him to take the treat. So he must have somehow figured what is going on, and then he probably remembered, wait a second, under those conditions I used to scream ouch.
Wow.
This was the anecdote that started my interest in the communication. Because we never trained them on anything like this, and he basically this was the second time he used a human word, ouch.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's complexity of communication within the species, but if you think of them communicating with another species, that's really mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say that in this case, he was all by himself for almost half a year or so. So he was very much in interaction with us humans. And so I think that's the reason why he was picking up some words or some utterances from us
Mm-hmm.
that he found interesting. But he didn't copy them right away. They are vocal learners; they can do this. But he didn't copy right away. But the interesting thing is that when he was using a new word, he was always using it exactly to the context. This was fitting, and without any training. I mean, but there were not many words. I think 3 in total. But they were fitting very nicely, and it was no training. It was simply just to interact with us. Yeah. And when he then got a mate, he stopped doing this. So he was not using those words anymore.
Well, that's interesting. Well, gosh, thank you so much. This has been really fascinating, and I'm excited to share your insights and stories with the listeners.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks very much for the interest.
Oh, the raven song is short, but it's strong, like the mind of an eager man. As the sun going down, I hear a raven making his round. Harvest is woe up from the land.
It was really wonderful to interview Dr. Bugnar and to hear his perspectives and expertise about ravens, and also hear some of his interest and anecdotes about them. Now we'll learn about 2 studies that were done by Thomas Bugnar. The first is called Social Dynamics Impact Scolding Behavior in Captive Groups of Common Ravens, Corvus corax. This is by 3 authors, one of whom is Thomas Bugnar. In the interview today, we learned about how there's a very concrete and highly structured dominance hierarchy in the raven community. This study looked at predator alarming and calling and compared that to the social levels of the different birds. After studying the behavior for a year and a half, they found that lower ranked ravens did less alarm calling or anti-predator responses, either because they failed to recognize them or because they suppressed their response due to group dynamics. And in contrast, they found that more dominant individuals had sort of more and earlier scolding and anti-predator reactions. Essentially, they found that spotting and calling out predators wasn't just about alerting the group. There was a lot of sort of politics involved about their status or dominance level within the group. The second study is called Why Are Ravens Smart? Exploring the Social Intelligence Hypothesis, and this is written by Dr. Bugnar, who we interviewed today. In this study, he talks about some of the things we spoke about in the interview today, such as how they form really complex social bonds with very set dominance hierarchies, and how they memorize group members over years and even figure out connections to sort of friends of friends or friends of family members. He says that their cognitive or intelligence skills may have been shaped over time by these really complex social environments that they live in. There's a lot more to those studies, and I kind of just brushed over the surface, but they're pretty interesting.
Shadow, shadow, what a show. Every other step there's a cross-eyed grove. Half return. Minneapolis, soft white snow. 35 bridge on 10. Half return. Standing in New York, dressed like a kid. The house is white and the lawn is dead.
Now we'll hear the classic poem, The Raven, by Edgar Allan Poe. This was a favorite poem of both my grandmother and my daughter, And so even though it's a bit longer, I'm going to share the whole poem. If you're sitting by a wood stove or relaxing on the couch, pull a little throw around you and get cozy. And here we go with the Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here for evermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. That it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" "This," I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more?" Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obseisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with a mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken. "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters it's its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore." But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy onto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned upon my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend? I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. That was a long poem, but I remember my grandmother Mimi reading and quoting from that poem. And when I was a mom of younger kids, I remember my daughters enjoying that as well. That was published in 1845 in The Raven and Other Poems by Edgar Allan Poe. And if you stuck with me, thanks for sticking with me. Thank you for joining us for today's podcast episode about ravens. It was really fascinating to learn about not only their intelligence, which has been renowned for many decades and centuries, but also what we've been learning about how they're intelligent and why. I hope you get to see some ravens out there, whether they're tapping at your window or up in the white pine trees or flying overhead. And I hope to see you at the next episode. In the meantime, if you enjoyed the episode, please share it on social media or pass it along to some friends to help keep the Biologica ball rolling. I appreciate all the listeners out there and hope to hear from you at biologica.podcast@gmail.com. And join us in 2 weeks for our next episode. In the meantime, keep discovering.